Hello, and welcome to the Plant Initiatives podcast series, where we talk with people about the innovative work they're doing to increase the respectful treatment of plants and to advance an effective plant advocacy movement through encouraging policy, law, and activism on behalf of plants. My name is Sue Fager. I'm a board member for the Plant Initiative, and with us today are Paul Moss, who's the executive director, and excellent technical assistance is being provided by fellow board member Maya Hum. Today, we are speaking with Margil, who's the executive director of the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. The center is also a recipient of grant funding from the Plant Initiative. Mari, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to get to speak with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to you and Paul and Maya. It's really nice to join you, and the support of the Plant Initiative has been really important for our work. And so we appreciate the opportunity to be able to share it in this way as well.
So let's start there. Mari, tell us a little bit more about the center and the work you do there.
So the center is based in the United States. We're based in Spokane, Washington, and we do work across the states with communities, different levels of government, as well as tribal nations. And we also work abroad. So we do quite a bit of work in places like Ecuador, Nepal, the UK, and other countries, working with civil society groups, grassroots communities, as well as government at all levels, like state, local, provincial, national, to understand and advance the legal rights of nature through law and policy, through enforcement in the courts, and other means.
Okay, thank you. At the Plant Initiative, we are working to build understanding of plant intelligence, plant sentience, and plant consciousness, and how those things interact people's relationships with plants. Would you share your personal relationship with plants and how it informs your work?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think the focus of the Plant Initiative is actually quite unique. And I know you can all speak to that very well. I think the focus on plants for me really, you might laugh, but I think in some ways it comes out of having always sort of felt in my bones, that I care about the environment. I want to do something to protect the environment. And when I was sort of getting into that area, one day somebody said, "Oh, you're just a tree hugger." And and they said it sort of, humorfully, but also a little bit of bristly. And I realized, I've actually never hugged a tree. Like, I said that to myself. And I made it my business to go ahead and do that. And so in some ways, I think it sort of started there. I didn't really think about it, but then I was like, hugging a tree. Wow. Yeah, that was meaningful to me to do that. And for me, some of what was sort of my journey to understanding the importance of this beyond sort of my own just feeling that this is important. We need to protect nature. Plants are absolutely essentially connected with that. But in my own journey, sort of in learning, I think one of the things that has struck me more than anything has been gaining a real strong understanding of what happens in places like forests and underground, the things that we don't see, and how connected it is, and how plants and trees and fungi are a common community and helping one another. That to me has sort of given, I don't know, I guess I would say sort of a tangible concreteness to what I've always sort of believed, but really provided me with a strong understanding that this is a common community that helps each other, that supports each other, that provides nutrients and water and other things that the community needs. And to me, that I don't know, I found that to be really powerful once I learned that, and also said to me, that's of course how we humans should be living. And such a model, that I don't know. I just find that incredibly powerful. And I find that as more people really come to understand that, relationship that plants have with one another, I think that gives people a strong understanding of why it's so important that we really rethink our relationship with plants in the whole natural world.
Mm-hmm. It's really exciting to be alive and on the planet right now that all this knowledge is finally, which I think indigenous peoples have always had, that this knowledge is percolating into the wider consciousness, I guess.
Yeah, I quite agree. I quite agree.
So your organization works with a rights of nature framework. Can you talk about that a little bit and how and how you've used it successfully?
Yeah, and this is work that the Plant Initiative has supported, and that's been very important to us. So just very basically, the rights of nature is a movement to recognize that nature possesses legal rights. Those rights include the most basic right of all, the right to exist, but also rights, for example, to evolve, for nature to perform its natural functions, like a river, for instance, to provide the habitat for the plants and other creatures that depend upon that habitat, the right to regenerate if harmed, and the right to be restored. Those are sort of like 5 core rights that rights of nature laws generally include. Sort of what does nature need to be healthy, robust, resilient, to have well-being? This movement really has come out of what I would say is a failure of today's environmental laws, which treat the natural world as a thing, mm-hmm. As just this resource that's sort of waiting around for human beings to use it. And what environmental laws largely do, and this is laws across the US and really across the world, are based in this concept of nature just being this thing, that environmental laws are focused on authorizing, legalizing how humans can use that thing, i.e. nature, which means that our environmental laws that communities and people look to protect nature are in fact legalizing the use and exploitation of nature. So fracking, for instance, uses millions of gallons of fresh water at every frack well, contaminating that water, drilling down miles underground, causing explosions, greenhouse gas emissions, all of these things. So using the atmosphere, using the land, the soils, using water, all of those things are legal under the law. So environmental laws are legalizing environmental harm. And it's got understanding that's taken some time to come to that understanding and recognizing, and this really came from United States communities that we worked with that came to understand that they weren't able to protect the environment because the laws set up to protect the environment weren't actually set up to do that. And so it meant kind of looking at this from a systemic perspective. If we need to protect the natural world, and existing laws that are ostensibly set up to do that are not actually based on that framework, we need to make a really systemic change. And that means with the overlapping environmental crisis that we're facing today, not only changing how we live on the planet, but really make a fundamental shift in how human beings govern themselves toward the natural world, and changing how nature itself is treated under the law, from being a thing or a resource to being recognized as a living entity with legal rights. Legal rights are the highest form of legal protection that we have in human written law. And over the past 15 plus years, my colleague Thomas Lindsay here at the center wrote the very first rights of nature law anywhere in the world for a community that was facing toxic waste coming into the community, and found that environmental laws simply weren't set up to help protect them from that. And then we worked in Ecuador in 2008, which became the first country to enshrine the rights of nature within its constitutional framework. And today we have many countries that have rights of nature laws at national levels, local levels. We have courts in places like Colombia recognizing rights of, for example, the Amazon region. We have tribal and First Nations that are moving this into their laws and governance. And so we're seeing this growing movement. And I think that really comes as these environmental crises become more real to more people in more places, unfortunately, but also as people are getting a much stronger understanding that existing environmental laws, regulations, rules simply are not adequate to the task of meeting these crises, overcoming these crises. and really because they were never set up to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the rights of nature was really born out of necessity. We think it very much builds on other movements for rights that have transformed that which was treated as, a thing, a human being, an enslaved person was treated just as a thing without legal rights, and being recognized finally within laws as a person with rights. And so nature is on its own journey in that transformation now in many countries around the world, as more and more we're seeing this sort of shared understanding that we really need to make a fundamental shift, and the time is now, and the rights of nature is very essential to that pathway forward.
Okay. You've talked about a couple of initiatives. Could you share a couple more that the center is supporting, particularly with Indigenous and other at-risk groups?
Yeah, so the Plant Initiative supported and continues to support our work with tribal nations, particularly Chippewa band tribes in Minnesota. And that includes our work with the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, which we worked with several years ago to develop a law to recognize rights of Menomin, or wild rice. And Menomin has very real, practical needs for the White Earth, in terms of it's a very important part of their sustenance, but also very serious cultural and historic significance as well. Menomin requires freshwater habitat, and the lakes in Minnesota are, very important ecosystems for wild rice. And there's all sorts of threats that wild rice is facing. And that means that these natural freshwater bodies are facing within Minnesota, including things like pipeline construction, the Enbridge pipelines bringing Alberta tar sands oil down through the state. And so the rights of wild rice law that White Earth adopted established that wild rice possesses legal rights. It is the first law to recognize the rights of a specific plant species. And those rights can be exercised, that is enforced by the wild rice itself, because it is the holder of the legal rights and protections. And we assisted White Earth in their litigation several years ago that they brought into tribal court. The first case to go, rights of nature enforcement case, to go to a tribal court to enforce the rights of the rice. So wild rice was the lead plaintiff, along with tribal members and the tribe itself, against the state of Minnesota. And because the state of Minnesota had issued the Enbridge Corporation, the pipeline construction, the use of 5 billion gallons of water, which we know has been contaminated, and there have been blowouts and all sorts of things. That has specific impacts on the freshwater habitat that wild rice depends upon. And as Minnesota is in an extraordinary drought situation, it only makes things worse. So the Plant Initiative has supported that work to recognize rights of wild rice, and other tribes in the region are now moving in that direction to recognize the rights of particular habitat that protect plant and animal species. Fish in particular is one of great importance. So this work has continuing to grow and evolve, and we see Indigenous leaders, tribal nations, really, I guess what the word is, just becoming real leaders on this work, particularly within the United States, and Indigenous peoples in other parts of the world similarly are sort of at the forefront of the rights of nature movement.
Good. So I've read some of the work that I've read about some of the work that you've done around the ancient wisdom that Indigenous and First Nation peoples have always had in terms of right relationship with their environment and the planet and the beings that live on it. How can non-Indigenous individuals and groups who really want to embrace that understanding do so without engaging in cultural appropriation?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. for us, we have spent a lot of time working with individual tribal members and tribes. And that for us is really just a process of listening, conversation, building relationship, just understanding their perspective. What is it that they need? What do they want? What is not working for them? I mean, it's a basic way of saying it, but and how would rights of nature, what is their perspective on that? How do they feel that that could be of help if they are going to pursue it to protect wild rice or fish or a water body, for instance? And so for us, that's just been a process of conversation, of sharing learnings. And to us, that building of partnership is very, very important. And spending time together. I mean, it's sort of that simple, that sounds a little simple perhaps, but it's for us, it's really about building those relationships, building trust, building understandings. And for us, working with tribal nations has very much been a privilege for us and a deep learning experience for us. And being able to share that with others to us is really quite important. And so we spent a lot of time, and that's something actually the Plant Initiative has helped support, is us bringing that learning and experience to others, like through webinars and other things, to share what tribal leaders, tribal attorneys are doing to protect the rights of wild rice, protect the rights of nature.
So you, I think, are working with tribal communities internationally, not just in the U.S.
Yeah, we've engaged with different First Nations in Canada, for instance. When we were in Ecuador, a number of the delegates to their constituent assembly, which was tasked with drafting the new constitution there, a number of those delegates were Indigenous delegates representing different Indigenous communities across that country. And so that work continues to evolve. I think for us, it's been really interesting. We've done a lot of work with partners in Australia, for instance, and seeing how that Aboriginal peoples there think about nature and think about protecting nature and talk about it in terms of like obligation to protect. And the words are different, but the concepts we find are very similar. So when we work, for instance, with the Soxhawtla tribe, which is based in Washington State, and they brought the second rights of nature enforcement case last year to recognize rights of salmon, whom they consider a relation and part of their creation story. And they talk about their responsibility to protect, which is, slightly different than obligation, but I think it's very similar. And that how colonizers, settlers have interfered with their ability to fulfill their obligation or responsibility to protect nature, to protect their relations. We've learned quite a bit in working with different Indigenous communities and organizations in different parts of the world who do seem to have a similar cultural, historic, and ongoing relationship with nature.
I feel like we have so much to learn, and that the wisdom that tribal and Indigenous communities hold can help us save the planet. But I think you're right. I think there's a whole lot of bridge building and trust that needs to be reestablished.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we're always reminded of, and it's a good reminder, is often when people learn about the rights of nature, they think it's this new idea. And whenever we're working with our tribal partners, for instance, they're like, this is not new, and this is ancient, and welcome to the conversation.
Yes.
And I think that's really, really important for us to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I think about the Indigenous peoples, the first Aboriginal people of Australia, and how long they lived in their environment before conquest, and the knowledge they had, 60,000 years at least, I think. And I'm so hopeful we don't lose it. They don't lose it. But I'm a little passionate about that, Mari, in case you can't tell. Oh, so what can the individual person do
Yeah, I think
to
that's
create
a
change in their
yeah, I
community?
think it's a really important question. And I think one of the, we work with lots of individuals, which is to say that people who contact us because they feel like something is happening in their community, or their area, wherever they live, and they're not finding a lot of tools to protect against like some sort of threat to the environment, for instance. Um, and so we often work with individuals who often are part of a community or a grassroots group, um, to help, just share some education and materials about what is the rights of nature. We do trainings. Um, so I and then people can, decide what their path is. But
Mhm.
when people say what can we do, the first thing that we often say is, just do, take some time, to understand what this is. We have all sorts of resources, of course, on our website and videos and so forth. See if it resonates. If you're part of a group, see if you want to have a conversation, and just really do some learnings around it. I think that's very important. And I will also say, and this is a conversation we often have, with people, particularly in local communities, who say, well, the crises that we're facing are on a global scale. And we feel either overwhelmed or that doing something locally, doesn't have the kind of impact that we want. And of course, we all feel urgency now, more than ever, and can feel almost paralyzed by what's happening. But the way that we talk with communities is, where do you ask yourself the very practical question, which is, where do you feel that you can realistically make change right now? Maybe it is at your state level, maybe it is at the provincial level, maybe it is at the national level. But particularly for communities in the United States, our experience has been that the place where they feel that they can make their meaningful change right now is within their own community, and then bring other communities together to replicate that change, to join forces in solidarity and push change upward, which is really what the pathway for change in the United States has very often been, with rights-based movements, starting grassroots, working up to the state level and the federal level. So I don't take, I'm not, what am I trying to say? I guess I don't think people should feel that, like, if they're not working at the international level, it's all for naught. Absolutely not. This change, really has begun and continues to grow at the grassroots. And I think that's not easy work to do. And so if people really want to make change, I would say start there, see what you can accomplish, because I think there's a whole lot of people who feel similarly, that they want to do something and they're not quite sure what to do. This is very meaningful change that people can advance.
That's really encouraging and hopeful, Mari. Because
Good.
I think you're right. People who care really do feel overwhelmed and
Yeah.
think, I am just one person. What kind of change can I make happen?
Yeah. I think and I understand it. Believe me, I have my days. But I also try to put some perspective on things and think about, for example, like in the States, the suffragists and the abolitionists, they all started, one or two people around a kitchen table having a conversation, very much local, very grassroots, and built the change over time, and look what they accomplished. So I take great hope from that, knowing that it's happened before and now it's our turn.
Excellent. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
That's right.
So I'm curious to know, what positive action or change resulted from your efforts that either surprised you or that you weren't expecting to happen?
Oh, there are many. I will tell you
I,
one of them.
I'm sure there
I mean,
are.
just in general, I will say that, when the first rights of nature law was adopted by a small community in Pennsylvania in 2006, and my colleague Thomas worked on that, never in our wildest imaginations did we think 2 years later we'd be working with the Constituent Assembly in Ecuador as they were drafting a new national constitution. And we really had no sense that, number one, of course, never could have predicted it. But even when the invitation came, to go to Ecuador, we almost thought about not going, because we thought that will never happen.
Mm-hmm.
little did we know. And so we seized, the opportunity and said, let's see what happens here. And so all to say is that we have learned many things along this path. One of those is you can never anticipate, but you can try to prepare for what will happen. And that the kind of change that we think is needed also doesn't happen always in a straight line, meaning that change can come in different places. So from a tiny community to a nation, that was a 2-year leap. And when Ecuador's ratified its constitution, it kind of opened the eyes of people all over the world to say, this is possible. Wow, can we do that? And so this movement has accelerated in a way we never expected. And so that has all been unexpected, good, but unexpected. And so, we're just sort of, what's going to happen next? I don't know, but we're trying to prepare.
Thank you. Do you have any final thoughts for listeners, Mari?
I guess I would simply say we have a lot of resources, including trainings for both just activists, people on the ground, lawyers on our website that anybody is free to access. And we welcome that, and other resources. And if folks are interested in wanting to see what they might be able to do with their group or their community, please feel free to contact us. We welcome that.
All right. How can listeners learn more about the center?
We have a website, centerforenvironmentalrights.org. You can just contact us. We respond to our info@centerforenvironmentalrights.org email. And we are on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, so you can follow us there. We have a e-newsletter, so please sign up for that. And one other thing I would just say is, I'm not quite sure when this podcast is going up, but later this month, and this is October 2023, we're beginning a 4-part session, 4-week session with Bioneers, who's providing us an opportunity to do a 4-week session with people who are interested in learning about this. And one of the sessions actually is going to focus on what tribal nations are doing, and in particular what happened with the rights of wild rice. And so we think that's going to be really interesting for folks. So you can still register for that if folks are interested.
All right. Mari, it's been such a pleasure having the opportunity to talk with you today and learning more about the work of the center.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you. This has been great.